This is Chris Evans from Architecting IT, and today I'm here with Prakash Darji from Pure Storage. Prakash, how are you?
I'm doing good, Chris. Thanks for having me.
So, we're going to talk today about a conversation we had 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. We had a little bit of a briefing and we were catching up. You're GM of the customer experience side of Pure Storage, and we were having a conversation around storage as a service. So, we're going to have a chat today and talk about that. But before we do that, do you want to give everybody a bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, I've been with Pure Storage about 4 years. Previously ran the FlashRay Group. Currently run our digital experience business unit, focused on driving our subscription and service economy here at Pure.
Perfect. So, the conversation really when we had a chat a few weeks ago was talking about storage as a service, and it's an interesting area where people have got a bit of an idea about what they think storage as a service should be, but actually in reality I think there's a lot more to it that people don't really sort of dig down into and have a look at. So when we talk about storage as a service, Prakash, exactly what we mean on that is that there's a lot to it, and there's a lot to dig into actually delivering storage as a service. And I just wanted to start by getting an idea of what you think and what I think about what customers want these days. Now, I've got a little list on my little presentation here, my little slide, and I picked out some what I think are quite obvious ones, like standardization and consistency of delivery, self-service and automation, reliability and zero downtime, scalability and cost management. I think those seem sort of fairly obvious, but I think if you're moving towards a storage as a service delivery, those things become pretty important for everybody.
Yeah, look, as I think about what customers want and what vendors want, I think there's an interesting intersection, right? Customers, I think, just want consistency and good unit economics, right? They're
Mhm.
so as they're buying terabytes or as they're buying performance, they just want good unit economics, but not at the cost of quality or consistency. Now, how do you get that is interesting, right? From a vendor point of view, I think standardization is the easiest way to achieve that, right? When you think about like manufacturing anything, you manufacture 10,000 items, the per unit cost of 10,000 is better than the per unit cost of one.
Absolutely.
So creating scale and consistency across that scale is the easiest way to give customers what they want. Now, I think that creates some challenges because if you look at the landscape today, it's pretty diverse, right? So you look at storage as a service on-prem, operating environments are different, customers' fault domains are different. There's a bunch of things that are different in landscapes today. And I think that's what creates the challenge of storage as a service today.
Okay. I agree the standardization across different platforms is really important. So I would want to see what's in the cloud working the same way as the stuff that I do on premises. And of course, if I was putting something into a colo, I'd expect something similar. So I agree. From that side of things, I think as a customer, I want that sort of level of standardization. Now, the funny thing is that in terms of our presentation, you came up with this wonderful diagram which talks about pizza as a service. I mean, who doesn't like pizza for a start? Let's get that out there. But what I liked about the diagram and what I found interesting about it is how it sort of layers up the different parts of pizza delivery into the as a service model. So you can go from the idea of do-it-yourself pizza, where you get the choice of everything, but at the same time you're getting the ingredients, you're cooking, you're doing everything, all the way to the other end of that scale, where you get somebody who delivers the pizza to your door, or even better, you go out for pizza and you sit in somebody's restaurant. You're not even having to do the washing up at the end of it. And that model sort of aligns to how we think of service offerings, even though it's sort of light-hearted. It's quite accurate in terms of the way it looks and the way that it describes what happens across service models.
Yeah, look, I think as you think about the pizzaization of the world, part of me is like, do I get higher quality if I do it at home, or do I get higher quality when I go to a restaurant? And as I think about it, I'm like, well, I've got a choice of restaurants. Um, some are cheaper, some are more expensive. But what's interesting is if you're making a pizza, right? And you're making, maybe you do it once a week, maybe you do it twice a week, etc., where the vendor's doing it 1,000 times a day. Um, the per unit cost of the pizza and the consistency and quality of the pizza are more predictable. There are times when at home it's like, whoops, doorbell rang and I burnt the pizza, or other days where it comes out perfect. So there's more variability when I do it myself. Of course, there's more choice. But as I think about, that pizza economy, it comes back to those 2 points I spoke about, which is standardization at scale and lower unit economics. So, kind of as we think about what this means for transforming storage, what it means for customers, how do you make choices that are optimizing for standardization and optimizing for consistency of delivery? And, the vendors that, consolidate and do this at scale can provide that level of consistency. And that's largely what I believe it means to deliver storage as a service.
Now, the interesting thing about the pizza model is that when you look at the detail of it, you can see um, the idea of, say, you having the ability to choose your own toppings at home. It might be actually very important for you because you might have a very particular topping that you don't find anybody sells. And similarly, you may have a very specific storage need, and you may choose to design and build your own storage system for that same reason. Probably not many people are in that situation, just as not many people have particular toppings. I was trying to think of something weird. I mean, the obvious one is everybody would think about things like fruit, pineapple on a pizza. But I would suggest that things like artichokes, white pizza we once had, there's lots of things out there that you might not want to necessarily put on a pizza. And similarly, at the other end of it, you may be very happy just going and getting the same stuff delivered time and time again, as you said. But you may actually want to choose somebody who has got the quality in how they deliver that. Now, how do we translate that to storage as a service? And I have another wonderful diagram here, which is slightly expanded in terms of its view of the pizza model. And it looks across everything from fully self-managed to public cloud, going through two types of infrastructure, both the customer managed infrastructure, you could describe it, which is basically just we've shipped you the hardware, get on with it, to the sort of middle ground where the vendor ships you the hardware, but they do a bit more work. And then there's that third or fourth one, depending on how you're counting this, which is the one where it sits in a colo. And that might be done in a different way. But at each point, you've got a choice as to how you want that to take that resource. And you see a similar sort of approach with storage as a service, I think, just as you see with pizza as a service.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think not the entire world is not uniform in terms of how, they want to deliver. So obviously choice along the spectrum of full service to service light should exist, and based on where people's needs are and where they want to go. Likewise, back to the pizza thing for a second, there is that fruit option. I live in California. I feel like I can go somewhere in the menu of toppings that are available to me around what someone's willing to put on a pizza is absolutely insane at some of the places we find here. I don't know that I would have that amount of choice when I do it at home. Now, that being said, by and large, I assume that, if I'm going out to a pizza place, I'm choosing off their menu, not mine. And when I'm doing it
Mm-hmm.
at home, I have control over my menu. So I think that makes people, a little bit, down to their personality type. Is it something that I need control over, or is it something I'm willing to relegate control over? And if you're relegating control over your environment or something as critical as storage, it comes down to trust, right? Do you trust this vendor is going to be able to deliver that consistency and quality? And it comes down to the service level agreements that, are you putting your money where your mouth is? So, is it a real SLA? Does the SLA have teeth? Are there financial penalties for missing the SLA, et cetera? Right. So as you take a look at, you know, uh, the options in market, obviously the option of you could buy hardware has been around for a while. I think, there's some vendors who are trying to rebrand that customer managed service. Well, of course, when we've been shipping you hardware for 40 years, you've been the customer managing your own stuff. So, I find that term term is, describing something that's always existed. But when you actually take a look, I don't think that we should shy away from expecting or even telling folks that the service delivery experience is the best way to get you consistency and better unit economics at scale. And whether it's in a colo, in your data center, et cetera, the higher up you go up the service tree, the more consistency, standardization, and better unit economics you'll get.
Yeah, I'm sort of really interested when I see that and see how that the vendors have packaged these things and how they're going to be built and how they're going to be sold. Because when I start thinking about what responsibilities I used to have on premises, when I was looking at things like capacity management, performance problems, fault management, everything around that sort of operational side of stuff, giving that control to somebody, I think would be really dependent on having a degree of trust with that company that I knew they could actually deliver that. So, you know, the last thing I'd want to do is find that I had a performance problem and somebody couldn't be looking at that instantly, or we hit a capacity issue and somebody hadn't actually alerted us, or had tools, or had some sort of automated AI that could predict where we were headed ahead of time. And the larger the company you are, the more complex environment you have, the more variables are involved. And there's a lot of human nature aspects there, and there's a lot of human interaction you just can't deal with anymore. So, a lot of, I guess, passing over the responsibility to a vendor is about trying to take the human out of the loop, trying to give more predictability, trying to take out some of those error points. But you have to have a degree of trust that the vendor really is able to take those skills over and isn't just putting in a person to replace another person.
Oh,
I'm not
100.
sure what your view is on that side of things.
Yeah, look, you know, you call it human middleware, right? A lot of
Yeah,
times you paper over these things with human middleware, but technology does matter, right? One of the foundations to our approach is we have this evergreen architecture at Peer that allows us to expand performance or capacity non-disruptively. Um, and that approach largely is required if you want to ensure that at the end of your service term, you aren't doing a data migration or you hit a performance issue, you need to expand performance. And without planned downtime, those can't be, in a real service, downtime is your enemy. And, when you look at a lot of, service offerings that are in market, there's always terms and conditions that say, except for planned downtime, except for this, except for that. Like the nature is without the technology that allows you to handle performance and capacity management SLAs or allows you to renew your contract without a data migration, um, you're not really getting the benefits of the consistency and operations at scale of what you would expect of a real service. So, I think that as certain things in a data center, right? Let's say you're not in a colo, there may be a human involved to go ahead and okay, let me add some capacity and do that. But it should be completely non-disruptive, and it should be done through observability in advance of your needs, right? As
yeah,
you take a look at the colo, it gets even better because it can be done instantaneously because the personnel is there, right? When you're dealing with storage in a data center, there's always some element of what physically needs to be done. But there's also, the element of like, okay, previously, if storage was a static asset, when your workload didn't work on one box, you moved it to a different box of higher performance, higher capacity, et cetera, right? And if you're doing that, you're taking time, you're taking labor, you're dealing with the host mappings, et cetera. Versus if you said, you know what, this storage is elastic and I can scale performance up or capacity up, et cetera, without having to deal with workloads. Data has gravity, applications have gravity. And, one thing I've learned over time is application and data doesn't like being moved, right? So
absolutely.
by offering storage as a service and a kind of elastic capability, um, you allow data to remain in place. And I think that does eliminate a lot of churn in terms of labor and operations that typically exist in this environment.
Yeah, and let's not forget that data outlives the hardware. data outlives any particular component, including application code, including servers, everything. And ultimately, the data itself, although it is to a certain degree very intangible because you can't touch it, you can't feel it, you can't, I guess you haven't got any sort of way of actually describing it in that sense, but it does exist. And it does outlive all of the infrastructure it sits on. So you might replace your storage array, you might replace your servers. You're probably going to be using that data 10, 20, 30 years in the future, potentially, if it's got some real value. So that's a different approach to think about. I think sometimes that your data is the focus of this, and you need techniques, and especially around storage, that allows you to upgrade, monitor, manage all of this without actually having to, as you said, take downtime.
Oh, 100%, right? And, we've been talking about some of the base level services that exist in storage as a service, but, as you start moving up, you can start talking about how do you deliver RPO SLAs? How do you deal with vulnerability management SLAs? Software lifecycle management. It's interesting if you take a look at software, storage system software. A lot of customers I talk to are like, I've got a change window. I only upgrade my arrays every 6 months or a year. And I'm like, well, if Linux has vulnerabilities every week and you're waiting 6 months for your storage lifecycle change, isn't that less secure, not more secure? Aren't you more compromised, not less? So as we think about, what's going on in the world today in, the area of security, I think software lifecycle management needs to follow more of a SaaS mindset of continuous updates, continuous remediation, continuous vulnerabilities. And each one of those things has to be done on a live system with no disruption. And some of the evergreen architecture choices we've made allow us to do so without having to plan for, hey, you can't use more than 50% of the capacity of the box because you're going to lose load or those types of things, right? So
Mm.
the architecture choices we've made and the technology we use look at standardizing those operations at scale.
So I wanted to go on and talk about that next, because I think that's really an important area, and that's that whole idea about how we put together some sort of framework around this. So I sort of touched earlier about the idea of, you could lift and shift a box that you might be selling on-prem, put a wrapper around it. In fact, actually, Prakash, people did this about 10 years ago, where they took a box, put a wrapper around it, said, oh, look, our boxes are now API enabled. And you're thinking, well, not really, because the API isn't sort of natively integrated into the platform to allow you to make hundreds of changes an hour, for example. All you've done is put a wrapper around to automate the CLI. That's not the same thing. So there's for example, hardware requirement to have native APIs into equipment so that you can build them into other frameworks. So you can build around things like automation. I don't want, for example, to be putting in RAID stripes of disks every time I need to expand the capacity. And like, why are we still focused on building out shelves of disks and having to worry about things like RAID striping when none of that technology is relevant anymore? There's a million and one architectural and framework pieces around the hardware, the software, and of course financial, that if you don't get those right, I don't see how you can deliver your storage as a service. It's just not possible.
Oh, 100% agree, right? There's two elements, right? On the software side, you largely want to move to policies, uh, not tactics, right? So, what is my software lifecycle management policy? Are these systems going to be on, get all the vulnerabilities? Are these systems on N+1, N-1? Those are policy choices that a customer should have. The execution to say, okay, now I have 900 systems and I need to update them one by one. I could give you an API to do that, but it would still be useless because you'd be spending a bunch of time on useless labor, right? So it comes back to that point you were making around, hey, like APIs is like, sure, you need APIs, but how do you minimize the labor required behind policies? So, to start, the fundamental layer is you can't measure or deliver consistency without monitoring. So telemetry and observability is everything. And I see a lot of vendors that have bolted on observability things after the fact, but then you actually don't have full level transparency and control. And, we've architected the observability into our systems since the get-go, right? Then you have capabilities to say management, right? How do you manage operations? Well, in that way, you've collected the information. You've got, either machine learning or AI assisted algorithms around recommendations you need to take, but you need to be able to push those policies and update. So with our Pure One Edge framework, we actually go ahead and have the ability to go ahead and have endpoint control, very similarly to a SaaS-based IoT platform. And then when you get into the financials around billing and consumption and procurement, there's the traditional approach of like, okay, I'm talking to a sales guy and buying things and upping, but you need to give customers control over their reserves and product, right? The operator is the one who's best positioned to say, what should my reserve be? So it's a piece of paper isn't enough. You actually need to build your service financial experience in product. And, what are the APIs you need in that world? Maybe getting those APIs to embed it into their procurement processes, right? Because every company has different sign off and procurement processes. So the definition of API at that standpoint has changed, right? It's a business process API for our procurement integration into company policies. So, as we evolve, I think the nature of, how the storage as a service in a customer's landscape needs to move.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because as you sort of look at that, and I've drawn a small diagram here, the classic Venn diagram intersecting the three, you start to see some pieces of your architecture and the pieces that we've been talking about for the last, say, 10 years really coming through. So Pure One is a good example of that. Initially collecting telemetry and using that to be able to report back, but that was in there from day one, and it didn't necessarily get exposed as Pure One initially, but you were already collecting that data from the very early days. Evergreen has been something that's been in place from 2015, maybe, is it around that sort of time? Off
Yep.
the top of my head. Um, and clearly, when that we're starting to see things like Fusion for the fleet management and so on. So bit by bit, you've been, I guess, in a transformation process or an evolution process, however you'd like to describe it, adding these features in, integrating them with each other, making sure they work in cooperation, so that you're not just bolting something on into a system that didn't have that in the first place. And I think that for me has been the very interesting thing to watch over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, Prakash. Just that coming together of all of this stuff as it really sort of starts to deliver in a unified way.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I joined the company 4 years ago, the first thing that I was introduced to was Pure's tent card. They said, our competitors have a manual with 400 pages. Here's our tent card of instructions that you need to know. And we've taken choices away. And that was like, I still remember that at my first day at the company when they handed me my tent card. And I was like, wait a minute, that's it? Like, that's all I need to know? Um, and you know what? It's both kind of bittersweet because I'm like, well, that's all I needed to know then, but there's a lot more I need to know now, right? Because the world's gotten more complicated and it's not just RAID anymore and those types of things. Now you're talking about availability zones and you're talking about globally distributed systems at, 50 petabytes, 100 petabytes, 150 petabytes. When you get into like large systems at scale, there's a lot more you need to do. And, that's still very labor intensive. So we're just continuing the ethos of like, okay, we reduced that 400-page manual to a 10 card. How do we look at that same problem set today and reduce the ethos to the set of policies and controls you need to do, right? Performance capacity being a set of policies, software lifecycle being a set of policies. Power management is becoming a big thing in Europe right now. That being, hey, what are the SLAs around power that we want? So, as we evolve and we simplify, power management, we're looking at that capability. RTO, RPO for availability, security SLAs. Like as we expand, we still have that ethos around using technology and evolving technology to reduce, not add. And that comes back to you know the pizza thing. You want choice. Yes, you want choice. and we're going to give you the choice, but we're not going to give you the choice to say, when you're on the menu, what degree temperature are we going to set our oven at? You want that at 350 or you want that at 375? Like, if I went to a restaurant and you asked me that, I would be like, why am I at this restaurant? You're here to make me pizza. Don't ask me whether you need to cook the pizza at 350 or 375.
Yeah.
Fruit on the pizza, sure, whatever. You can
Yeah.
ask me about that all you want. And I think that's the nature of how the world needs to evolve here.
And I'd expect you as a pizza delivery company to know exactly what temperature to cook the pizza. And I'd expect you as a pizza delivery company to have made enough pizzas to know that this temperature works better than this, and this combination of ingredients works the right way, and this will give me the flavor and this won't. You know, it applies the same to storage. Somebody should have done the work and said the architecture needs to look like this in order to deliver this degree of service. One thing you didn't mention in that list was multi-tenancy. I think that in itself is another big one where, you know, businesses want to be able to allow teams within teams to consume resources. So just being able to enable teams to be able to consume resources that are deployed across a wider plane, for example, not have to think everybody gets an individual box when that's not necessary. So it's all about that whole service model that this cloud has brought us and bringing that together into the platform, into the solution. So just as we sort of finish up, Prakash, let's talk about what happens next. So we know that Portworx is in the portfolio. We've seen Portworx Data Services allow us to start to do some of this stuff. Where do we go next in terms of the as a service model? Do we see more evolution around those technologies?
I think you'll see evolution happen along three vectors. One is we're still in the early days of the infrastructure as a service evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see, standardizing operating at scale for more SLAs down the storage, vector, right? There's a lot more to do in that landscape.
Yeah.
Then you'll see another vector in terms of application development. So standardizing application development services with Portworx Data Services, we're doing that with databases, for example, open source databases at scale. How do you get configuration and security standardization when you're deploying Cassandra, Mongo, Postgres, a bunch of databases, right? You'll see that work its way into, standard recovery and RTO, RPO, whether it be VM or container with, for DR, for backup, those types of things. Because I think that policy-based management happens in broader than just storage. It happens with VMs and containers, and we're looking at that. Then the next set, where I see this evolving is how does it become embedded in companies' business processes? So I think, if I was to take a look at kind of a horizon out, I do think the management domain getting embedded in different management domains. And that could be via, large managed service providers. That could be that do it on company's behalf. That could be getting natively embedded in a customer's operations that say, hey, I've got footprints when I deploy SAP. When I deploy it, here's the footprint that I use to scale. And this is how I purchase, and this is how I manage, and this is how I provision, and getting embedded into those workflows. So that management embedding workflow, I think, does require a lot more work in standardization as well, because today I don't believe that's a uniform landscape.
It sounds to me like there's an awful long way to go. There's a lot more we can do. Um, there's a massive degree of subtlety in a lot of this. Just tweaking and adding features that allow people to work really, really flexibly. There's a huge amount around SaaS and the ability to use portals to do a lot of this work, because that gives you much more access to the data that you can both collect, but also you can, as you said, set policy. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few years, and we'll hopefully we can still follow you and see what you're up to, and in this as this story evolves. But for now, if we wanted to push people in the right direction to look at stuff online, they could obviously go to purestorage.com. But can you recommend anything else you'd like them to look at, or should we suggest they look at a certain part of the website, or follow you,
Yeah.
or anything like that?
Yeah, look, check purestorage.com out, look up Evergreen. It's foundational. We have kind of three business models for Evergreen. Evergreen One, which is the most service oriented. We have Evergreen Forever, which deals with keeping your hardware current. So and we have Evergreen Flex, which customers use for fleet optimization across multiple boxes. So as we take a look at our portfolio, check it out, and you'll find that we're a vendor that you can trust because we've been doing this for a while for a wide variety of customers, and we're continuing to innovate and make sure we drive the service economy.
Perfect. Prakash, thanks for your time. It's been really good to catch up with you, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
All right, thank you.